Good day, friends. Here we have a basic Edwardian era corset pattern. You may notice I'm a lot more comfortable sewing a corset than I am working on a simple chemise. This is not my first rodeo. I made about 3 or 4 corsets and a boned bodice before all my sewing stuff went into storage. It's a very familiar subject. As such, it was the perfect project to get to know my new-to-me sewing machine. Top stitching with my faff is a blast. Seriously, I love it. Okay, so I put the corset away for a couple of weeks while I was working on the chemise, so this is what we have to work with. Whole bunch of raggedy seams. I don't like this on the interior of my corset. They need to be covered up in some way or eliminated. The outside of the corset looks fantastic. Inside of the corset is a dog's breakfast. 2 out of 10 do not recommend. I will be ripping all of these seams back. I've got a cotton that can be used as a lining, so that will be cut out. And then I am going to do what are called welted seams, which will encase all of these ragged edges on the inside of the corset where no one has to see it, and where they will pretty much bind themselves off. And it will allow me to make boning casings out of the corset itself rather than having to use any kind of boning casing strips, which is fantastic. I have little marks all over the place here because I had to measure out the boning that I had. Turns out I am short a little bit, which doesn't surprise me. I ordered the boning in advance thinking that I would get ahead of the curve, and, well, that didn't seem to work out for me since I am not the same size as the person from Farthingales who put their information online as to what boning sizes one should order for making a corset the way that they did. They used half the boning that is recommended in the pattern. I'm waiting for new boning to come in and some bone casing just in case. But in the meantime, I think what we're going to do is take this upstairs, sit down, watch a couple of shows, rip these back, and just get on the way of making this look a whole lot nicer. Lucky for me, the silk dupioni I'm using on the outside is very forgiving. The twill core, I just don't care. It's going to get covered up by lining, so that will hide a multitude of sins, I'm sure. I slipped a couple of times with the seam ripper and caught the outside layer. The tears are close enough to the seam allowance that it's only slightly noticeable on the finished project. A smart person would have recut the pieces. I am not that person. I can live with it.
I wound up using a combination of techniques. The welted seams are rather simple. When you want to attach the next pieces, you layer them right side together with the pieces you've already sewn. You'll notice that the filling in my fabric sandwich is the waist tape, which I've carried along down the middle. The other technique I used was a floating lining along the front pieces. It made it a little easier to place the boning channels in the front. Don't be confused by the footage. I constructed one half of the corset from the back panel and worked forward, then constructed the second half from the front and worked back, mostly because the floating lining was still on my mind. Like Bernadette Banner in her Victorian corset making video, I tried to use the age-old method of carefully spreading apart fibers for my grommet holes. Like her, I failed. I used a punch just slightly smaller than in the demo and used my larger awl to widen the hole. Much better. The one drawback to this method is that the punch doesn't always cut cleanly and you have to pull the fabric to unstick the punch. You also have to clear the punched fabric from inside the bottom piece. Happily for me, punching the holes doesn't take long, and after swapping out the top punch tool, I quickly grommeted both sides of the corset. Then I inserted the boning. Looks like everything fits properly. The last step was to apply the binding. I used some commercial bias tape I'd bought years ago. The color works really well with both the lining and the fashion fabric. I sewed the binding on by machine using the fold in the bias tape as a guide. Then I wrapped the binding over the edge and felled it to the lining on the back side. I'm extremely pleased with how tidy this looks. With that finished, we have an Edwardian corset. Bear in mind, I didn't make a toile and I didn't do any fittings. This is exactly what the largest size in the pattern will give someone at the far end of the plus size range. Please thank the husbeast for his assistance. Lacing behind my back is a challenge. I find it funny that the bust gore is for a double D bust, but is more than ample for my H cups. I never thought I'd see the day when I might actually have to pad my chest, though it would be a period-appropriate silhouette. The instructions are very basic and bare bones, and I followed them up until I ripped the corset apart and re-seamed. At that point, I expect I would have used casings as bone channels and either left the corset as is or put in a floating lining. My way, truth to be told, has a bit more strength in the seams. It's not a bad corset. I'll be interested to see what happens if I lose a few inches and actually tailor the pattern to my dimensions. In the meantime, on to the next adventure.
Thank you.
You're welcome. There we go. You don't appear like you're in need of a hot cup of tea and a sandwich.